A special thanks to all the channel members and Twitch subs that support me on both YouTube and Twitch. After over 20 hours playing Sonic Superstars, I've 100%ed the entire game. I got all the achievements and obtained the game's true ending. Now let's discuss whether this retro adventure can stand side by side with the exceptional Sonic Mania. This video will contain major spoilers, so watch at your own risk. Sonic Superstars takes place on a new set of islands called the North Star Islands. Dr. Eggman has conquered the area and has a new ally named Fang the Hunter to aid him in controlling the area, along with a captured native named Trip. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy must rescue the area from Dr. Eggman's control as he goes back to try and enslave Flinkies in order to create new robots. The story is simple, as per Sonic retro games, and maintains the same childlike charm with expressive avatars conveying the character's actions as opposed to words. It's your standard Sonic story, nothing truly exceptional about it, but also nothing bad about it. If you're expecting something deep and meaningful like in Sonic Frontiers, you're not going to find it here. It's your standard retro game story. Players can choose to play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, or Amy at the start of the game, with the exception of an exclusive character that you get by completing the game named Trip being added to the mix. Many of the core features of a retro Sonic game are here, with Sonic serving as the basic option, and the others coming with more mobility options along with Sonic's abilities. Tails can fly for a small amount of time, Knuckles can glide and climb on surfaces, Amy has a double jump and hammer strikes, and Trip also has a double jump and can cling to surfaces. Sonic does have the drop dash ability, which is a lot easier to execute here, simply just hold down the jump button. Since you can choose from any of Sonic's friends, the stages have been designed to accommodate everyone. Everyone has Sonic's baseline abilities, but with the added mobility options, certain changes were needed in order to complement each of the stages. Sonic Superstars doesn't play like Sonic Mania or even the 2D levels from Sonic Generations, but instead like a mix of Sonic Lost Worlds and Sonic 1 from the Sega Genesis. The game instead encourages platforming first and speed second. Many of the stages have moments where you're either forced to slow down or stop entirely. Even the spin dash has been reduced dramatically in speed and momentum compared to other Sonic games. I would argue that this is the slowest the spin dash has ever been, at least from my experience, but it complements the direction Sonic Superstars has taken here. Since the stages are built around 5 different characters, not just one, they have to include mechanics for everyone beyond the baseline abilities, with the exception being stages made for those exact characters. The biggest new change is the addition of Chaos abilities. Sonic and his friends can obtain the Chaos Emeralds from bonus stages, accessible by large rings hidden in each stage. The bonus levels are just giant grappling challenges. The emeralds go on a set path and you must grapple to it in the time provided. It's an okay bonus stage, not too difficult, and it's probably one of the easier stages to obtain the emeralds compared to other Sonic games, likely because they play a bigger role in the gameplay this time around. Once you get all the emeralds, you can replay the emerald stages for medals, which I'll discuss more later. Each new emerald adds a new ability, such as a horde of clones that attack, slowing down time, a fire boost that allows you to jump to new heights, vines to climb on, revealing hidden objects, the ability to swim, a unique attack for each of the characters, and finally a super form for getting all 7 emeralds. You can trigger these abilities once per act, and once activated you can use them for a small amount of time. If you die within the act, you can then trigger the ability again. The super form is the only ability with a requirement of 50 rings to trigger, but you could turn it off at any time, but you'll still need a baseline of 50 rings to activate it again. If you take damage while using any of the abilities, the ability immediately ends. I did wish they included some sort of shielding as a power. The game does include the classic blue shield and a magnetic shield that attracts rings, but that's it. I just wish that there was some defensive option available. The super forms are what you would expect. You gain a boost in speed, momentum, and jumping, and you're immune to all damage except instant kills like being crushed or falling into a pit. I wish the super forms for Tails, Knuckles, and Amy's had a little more flared. Sonic's super transformation is iconic, but I wish they would finally reevaluate the others beyond just glowing Aurora. I remember in the original Sonic 3 and Knuckles, at least Knuckles glowed a little more. Trip, on the other hand, can turn into a dragon, which I think is super cool. I think they can actually use this for many other Sonic characters where they can go into some sort of mutated form. It just adds a new level that can be tapped into for future Sonic games. The Chaos abilities definitely add new flair to the gameplay. You don't have to use them, but they definitely make the experience easier, with Sonic able to double jump using the Flame ability, or players defeating bosses easily using the duplicate power. The only main issue is that you need to trigger the process using the right thumbstick, but it's a short timer. If you miss activating it during this window, you'll have to re-trigger it again, and it's just annoying to have to do it. There are 11 stages to venture through, with some of them having multiple acts, with a second story taking place after the events of the first. The game has a nice diversity of locations, ranging from forests, factories, deserts, and a lost city. Each one has its own set of challenges and new features that are unique to its levels, such as the forest having vines for grinding, or the desert having sinking sands. Players familiar with the Sonic franchise will be able to pick out a lot of Easter eggs and callbacks to classic games. The boss fights are a mixed bag. They are well designed, but some follow the same stand and wait retro formula too heavily. Basically, Sonic has to wait for a long enemy attack cycle before you can attack, especially in the prototype boss fight in Cyber Station. Some bosses do combat this by offering small avenues of vulnerability for skilled players to take advantage of, but I would argue that retro Sonic fights should start becoming more dynamic instead of sticking to this formula, because the attack patterns can get obtusely long. Once you complete the story, the game opens up a second, harder option in the way of Trip's story. The story follows Trip as she attempts to rid the last of Eggman's robots from her island and stop Fang. Basically, it's the same levels, but revised with harder options such as more traps, enemies, and obstacles. In addition, you can only play as Trip, but have access to all the Chaos powers. It can get frustrating as the levels tend to overload the flow of gameplay by adding way too many enemies or cheap difficult jumps to just make it a much more tedious experience, even going as far to place hazards outside the camera's placement just for those cheap hits. Unless you have the stages memorized to a T, be prepared to get hit and die a lot. I really wish they made unique levels, even if they were only a couple and it was far shorter than the main campaign. I don't mind when developers reuse assets to create something new, but this just seems like they cut corners. For example, in Sonic and Knuckles, despite going through the same levels Sonic went through as Knuckles, there were changes made to the levels to make them feel fresh, and Knuckles' abilities opened new options to explore the area. Amy already has Trip's double jump, and her wall cling ability is worse compared to Knuckles' climate ability. The dragon ability is neat, but compared to the other super forms, it feels slower, and the levels clearly were not made with this flying mechanic in mind. It doesn't help that the boss fights are just harder options of the original, with the exception being the final encounter, which is in an original fight. Don't get me wrong, I did like the challenge. It reminded me a lot of Sonic Heroes' hard mode, but so many of the encounters during this process were filled with one-hit death encounters, whether it's the final boss or the multiple bosses and levels that led to it. It was just really frustrating to lose everything because of a death pit that I didn't see because the camera was positioned in a very specific way. Outside of the emeralds, you'll get medals used for the multiplayer mode. These medals are found in the level and by accessing bonus stages by hitting a checkpoint with a certain number of rings and leaping into the portal. The last bonus level is random portals that provide extra rings and place you further into the level. The exclusive bonus medal stages are modeled after Sonic 1's special stages. You'll navigate a spinning arena separated into 3 parts, each containing a medal, and warp to zones after you collect each medal within each level. There are several different special stages, and once you go through them in chronological order, they reset. The multiplayer customization is pretty robust, but very, very predatory. You get a lot of options as you play the game, not only robot variants of Sonic's friends, but Easter eggs like knights, and a variety of paints, and you can mix and match whatever you want. The reason I say it's predatory is that you only get a certain amount of parts to create new options, and that goes for paint as well. This is just plain stupid. Why do I have to buy multiple paints to color my robot? I should only have to buy one paint and I should have infinite uses of that. This just reminds me of either, I forgot, Destiny 1 or Destiny 2, where you could only use shaders once or twice. In this situation, it just seems completely obtuse. Once I buy a paint or robot option, I should be able to use that indefinitely. I shouldn't have to keep rebuying the same thing over and over. Okay, let's discuss the multiplayer. The multiplayer involves multiple players battling out in a variety of competitive options. This ranges from survival, where you just try to survive as long as you can from collapsing platforms as cannons shoot you, collecting key items, in this the way of stars, and races. Players are given points based on their performance, and the person with the most points at the end of 3 rounds wins. There's a ranking system, but based on my playtime, most matches were filled with bots. It's a fun mode, but it's clearly already dead and nobody really takes this seriously. As for the campaign multiplayer, I can't really tell you much about it. The mode is only accessible through local, and I just plugged in another controller to get the achievement necessary for that. And there is also time trials, but I don't really take this seriously because Sonic has a notorious history of having people just hack these time trials, and guess what? It's already happening with Sonic Superstars. So if you engage with this, just be prepared that the number 1 ranks are going to be hackers who just put the timer at 0. Sonic Superstars acts more like a 2D version of Sonic Lost Worlds. It's heavily focused on platforming over high-speed levels, slowing down certain mechanics like the spin dash and forcing the player to stop due to certain hazards, likely to accommodate the character selection system to accommodate every character that you can play as. It can be frustrating at times, especially during Trip's campaign, due to the high increase of obstacles that often hamper the speed nature that fans love from Sonic games. The boss fights are definitely a mixed bag. They offer a variety of options, but it's clear the developers want to extend the 10-hour game by providing often grindy achievements that just require you to invest even more time, such as destroying 100 enemies with each of the unique talents from the selectable roster, or the dreadful destroy all the gold enemies, which the game doesn't even track of. You can't even track which gold enemies you've defeated in each of the stages, and it doesn't explain whether you need to do this for both the main campaign and Trip. I'm still unclear about it. The achievement just popped for me and I was like, I don't have to do this anymore. Regardless, the golden enemies are also worthless because all they give you are medals, which are worthless once you decide not to engage with the multiplayer mode, which I stated earlier is filled usually with bots. Sonic Superstars is definitely not a callback or a love letter to Retro Sonic, but instead it's its own adventure attempting to mix together new elements for a more elaborate experience. I give Sega credit, they're one of the few studios that still attempt to experiment with their mascot, and it definitely shows here. Sonic Superstars is not the greatest game, but it also isn't terrible. It's definitely a new brand of Sonic retro experiences that definitely won't appeal to everyone. Myself, I thought it was an average experience that pulled a lot of risk but didn't always hit the mark. It's a good game, just not a great one, and if you're coming in here expecting Sonic Mania 2, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Expect a platforming game first and a Sonic game second.